Hello everyone, it's Mr. Wolfe here. In this video, I'm going to be introducing the scientific practice of using models specifically as it has to do with photosynthesis. So I'm going to be going over this model 1 right here, and it has to do with that LOD experiment that we've done in class. All right, so in the space below, create a model to show the impact of light level on the rate of photosynthesis. CO2 and H2O, so carbon dioxide and water, are present in both chambers, but they're held constant, so the same in both chambers. Be sure to include all reactants, products, and the location of the chemical reaction, as well as labels in your model. All right, so our goal is, we've run this experiment before, right? We've planned an investigation, and we know the results, right? So just as a quick refresher, the more light we have, the more bubbles that we saw coming out of our plant, and the less light we had, the less bubbles we saw coming out of our plant. And those bubbles were oxygen bubbles. Those are the products of photosynthesis. So we know that there's more photosynthesis when we have more light. So it's our goal to explain what's going on, and let's draw what's going on in the plant that allows that to happen. And so we have, in order to do that, we have the high light level right here and the low light level. So low, low, high, high. So we can almost kind of split it up like that. But notice that there's 4 boxes instead of 2. All right, so what this is asking for here is the macro model. All right, so when I think of Mac or macro, I think of like a Big Mac. So think big. And here is the micro. So think of microscope, really tiny. So we're going to model the same thing, but just at different scales. Right? So imagine the macro levels maybe like looking at the scale of, let's say, a leaf. Right, so we could draw a leaf here. And I want to show what's going on with photosynthesis. So I know my reactants are going to be energy, carbon dioxide, and water. Right? And I'll have those going in. So notice that I'm not just drawing lines going right here, right? That I'm drawing an arrow. This shows that these ingredients are going into my leaf. And I also want to label that this is a leaf right here, right? Now, what could always help you is the fact that we have the words down here. These are the words that you're going to use in your explanation, in your caption, but then also in your model. Right? So I've hit on energy, which is the light here, carbon dioxide and water, and I need glucose now. And I know that glucose is going to be my product. So I could draw glucose. I could also just say glucose. Right? There's multiple correct ways to draw your model, which is nice. As long as you accurately show the difference, as long as you accurately show how photosynthesis is going down and the difference between the high light level and the low light level. So notice, by the way, that I had glucose staying in my leaf because the leaf's going to use the glucose, and oxygen leaves because oxygen goes back out into the atmosphere. Okay, so here's my model. And in the other situation, the low light, right, we still saw bubbles. Right, when we ran our experiment, even with low light, they were just less bubbles. So that means that we're still getting oxygen out of that process, which means that we're doing photosynthesis, that the plant's still making glucose. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm actually going to draw the exact same model as right here for now. All right. So obviously we have the same model right here, but we know that we're going to get different amounts of photosynthesis, so we need to somehow differentiate this model. So in this case, it looks like this is a high light level. So what I'm going to do is, to show that there's more light here, is I'm going to draw a bigger arrow. Right? And this just means, this is a visual way to represent that I'm getting more light that's going into my leaf compared to this situation. Right? Now what I might do is I might make the H2O arrow a little thicker. I might make the CO2 arrow a little thicker. But if I do that, because H2O and CO2 are held constant in the experiment, I have to do the same thing over here as well. So whatever held constant, you got to make those arrows the same width. Right? But notice less light, so I have less energy here. So what's going to happen as a result? Well, if I have more energy, right, that's more reactants. It's like I have more pancake mix. And if that's the case, I can make more pancakes. So I'm going to have more products, more glucose, and more oxygen. Over here, I still have plenty of water and plenty of carbon dioxide, but I have less light. And if I have less light, I just don't have enough ingredients. I don't have enough reactants. So I'm still going to get glucose and oxygen, but I'm not going to get as much. And that's represented by a thinner arrow compared to a thicker arrow over here. All right, so that's how we model our macro model. Now let's look at the micro model. So now imagine that we're zooming in into the plant cell, into the chloroplast, even further down to the molecular level. Right? And here are some of the things that we might model. Right? So here's glucose, and this is what the molecule looks like in terms of all the atoms connected. This would be a pain to draw every time, so we could notice it has kind of this this shape right here. We're going to draw just that general shape that we have here for glucose. Oxygen are two oxygen molecules bonded together, so we could just draw that really simply by having two O's and these two bonds right here. Same thing with carbon dioxide. Right? Di means two, so carbon plus two oxygens, carbon dioxide. I could represent this molecule like this. Right? Water's H2O, two hydrogens, one oxygen, and I could draw it in my model like this. Now for light, light's a little tough because light is not matter. It's not mass, right? It's a type of energy, and it's really elusive. It's not like a thing. So how we could represent light is just kind of these little tiny little suns or bursts of light, right, in our model. It's our way of representing what's going down. So we could use that as a reference. So if I zoom in right here, notice here's an arrow. On the left side is going to be my reactants. On the right side is going to be my products. So let's first start with the reactants. We have energy, CO2, and H2O. So I'm going to draw maybe just 3 CO2 molecules. And we have a lot of light energy in this high light level model. So I'm going to draw maybe like 3 suns. And we also need water. So I'm going to draw 3 water molecules as well. All right. Now from that, we're going to get products. We're going to get glucose, and we don't need to really get into the details of exactly how many glucose molecules you're going to get, exactly how many oxygen molecules you're going to get. But in general, I'm going to say, hey, if we have kind of like 3 of each over here, I'm going to make 3 of each over here. So our products are going to be glucose and oxygen. So now I'm going to do a similar thing over here, but obviously there's going to be a difference because this is the low light level. We obviously had a difference in results in our experiments in terms of the amount of bubbles. So for my reactants, it says that CO2 and H2O stays the same. So if whatever you draw, it doesn't have to be 3. You could have drawn 5 here. You could have drawn 2. Whatever you draw over here, you have to draw this. In the highlight level, you have to draw the same over here because it says that CO2 and water are held constant. Now the difference, though, is this is a low light level. So compared to my model over here where I just decided to draw 3, right? By the way, you could have drawn 2, you could have drawn 5. As long as you have less light represented in your model, you're good. Now what we could do is we could use this model to figure out how many products we're going to have as well. And so even though we have the same amount of CO2 and water, we have less light, so that's less reactants, that's less ingredients. So think about if we had less pancake mix, we couldn't make as many pancakes. So maybe with less light, we get only 1 glucose molecule. Maybe we only get 1 oxygen molecule that we're modeling in this case. So that's how we would draw the model on the macro scale, the micro scale, and how we would compare the high light level to the low light level. So now what we need to do is we need to kind of communicate our model. Right? So we could do that with our explanation, but then also with labels as well. So the fact that I've kind of labeled leaf, even if I didn't label it here, it's labeled here, that looks good. Maybe we want to just say that this is glucose, this is light, and you don't have to label each single one, but as long as you kind of reference what things are, you're good. And I think it's kind of straightforward that this is CO2, that this is oxygen, that this is H2O right here. So that looks like a good model. So now let's go to our explanation. So our caption, our goal is to describe your model using the following terms. So we kind of want to hit on 2 things. We want to make sure that we use the terms, right? But our goal is to explain why we get different amount of bubbles when we have a high light level versus a low light level. So what I want you to be thinking about is this just cross-cutting concept of cause and effect. Right? We know the effect is going to be less bubbles or less oxygen. So what caused that? Right? Why is that the case? Now, in my explanation, I actually did not start with cause and effect just yet. Right? I started off more with just talking about my terms. So I said, hey, light, carbon dioxide, and water. Light, carbon dioxide, and water, right, are reactants of photosynthesis. So just kind of setting the stage. And then I even gave a little bit more detail about the leaves, and sometimes chloroplast is going to be on your list. I might be covering it up with what I pasted right here. But let's just say chloroplast was one of our terms. I'd say, hey, well, these are my reactants, and photosynthesis takes place in the chloroplasts, which are structures in plant cells that make up leaves. So just kind of going a little bit more into detail about the relationship between chloroplasts and leaves and where photosynthesis takes place. I didn't mean to cross that out. Underline it. All right. So now I'm going to get to the cause and effect. Right. Now notice that the cause is in red and the blue is the effect. Right. So in this case, and I made a little bit of a mistake here because I copied and pasted it from a different key. So in the low, it's not CO2. It's in the low light, right, where there's less of a reactant. So right here, if I have less energy, right, less light, that's my cause in this case. Then my effect is there's going to be less glucose, right, and there's going to be less oxygen if I have less reactants, right? So it's that simple, right? Cause and effect. Cause, less reactants, specifically light. Effect, less products, specifically oxygen and glucose. All right. Thank you all for watching.